Throughout history, Africa has been a battleground for foreign powers, witnessing power struggles that extended from the colonial era through the Cold War and beyond. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union fueled conflicts in Africa by supporting factions in proxy wars. Despite a short-lived era of democratization and the removal of dictators in Africa after the Cold War, there has been a renewed upswing in foreign involvement in recent years. Driven by economic interests, geopolitical ambitions, and only occasional efforts to foster development, a renewed wave of foreign influence has established itself in Africa during the 21st century. China, the European Union, and other countries regularly convene summits, engaging in a competitive quest for economic and political supremacy. As the world's most influential nations vie once more for control over Africa's abundant natural resources, it appears that history is echoing itself. Is a new scramble for Africa looming on the horizon? Foreign powers have historically sought dominance in Africa, with past colonial forces disregarding ethnic and cultural considerations to establish nations based on convenience rather than cohesion. The late 19th century scramble for Africa, led by European powers like Britain, France, and Germany, resulted in arbitrary boundaries and ongoing conflicts. For example, Nigeria, formed in 1914 under British rule, experienced tensions among its diverse tribes due to forced amalgamation. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers have sparked conflicts between historical rivals, now confined within newly created nation-states. This legacy perpetuates internal conflicts such as the prolonged civil war in South Sudan and persistent ethnic tensions in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You can visit our page for an insightful video on more pressing issues arising from Europe's imposed borders in Africa. Beyond the political divisions, colonialism enforced the ruthless exploitation of economies. Prioritizing profit for the colonizers, it pushed for cash crop production and resource extraction, leaving local populations impoverished and reliant on volatile global markets. King Leopold II's rule in the Congo Free State exemplifies the atrocities caused by forced rubber production. Resource extraction in countries like Nigeria and Angola enriched colonial powers, perpetuating poverty among local populations. Today, inequalities in African nations, seen in inadequate infrastructure and limited access to basic resources, reflect this exploitative history. The psychological and cultural impacts of colonialism were equally profound. Foreign systems demonized and supplanted traditional beliefs and practices, fostering a disconnection from ancestral roots and a prevailing sense of alienation. This is exemplified by the British rule in Kenya, where the Mau Mau religious movement was banned. The identity crisis that emerged continues through generations, as seen in the disappearing languages and the ongoing challenge to balance traditional values with modern realities. The wounds inflicted on African nations deepened during the Cold War between 1945 and 1991, transforming them into pawns in a global ideological struggle. The United States and the Soviet Union manipulated African nations, orchestrating coups, supporting rebels, and endorsing tyrants for strategic advantages. Proxy wars in Angola, Mozambique, and the Congo, fueled by external support for rival factions, worsened local conflicts. Geopolitical interests took precedence over democratic values, with both superpowers backing authoritarian regimes aligned with their goals, hindering democratic growth and civil liberties in many African countries. Redirecting resources from development to prioritize military expenses and ideological conflicts impeded economic growth, perpetuating poverty in Africa. The end of the Cold War briefly brought hope as Western powers promoted democracy and human rights. This led to the removal of Cold War-backed dictators like Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire and Mengistu Haile Mariam in Ethiopia when their supporters lost interest. However, this democratic spring was short-lived. The ascent of new global players such as China and Russia, prioritizing economic pragmatism over ideological concerns, are contributing to a resurgence of authoritarian tendencies in Africa. In the past 2 decades, the United States, China, and Russia have been actively trying to build and maintain alliances in Africa. Even nations with comparatively less influence, such as Japan, India, and Brazil, are currently involved in African affairs. This increased competition for influence carries both potential advantages such as trade and investment opportunities and notable drawbacks for African nations. While it brings economic opportunities, it also worsens conflicts, strengthens authoritarian regimes, and undermines local control. Under the pretext of counter-terrorism efforts, foreign military presence is expanding on the continent, with Djibouti emerging as a focal point. It currently hosts the sole permanent US military base in Africa, serving as the largest American installation on the continent. The American naval and drone bases in Djibouti play a crucial role in operations spanning Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and beyond. Notably, France, Italy, and Japan, alongside the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia in West Asia, have also established military bases in the country. Meanwhile, Turkish troops find refuge in Somalia, while the UAE establishes military bases in Eritrea and Somaliland. The military expansion isn't just about strategic positioning. UAE powers are actively trying to control vast African forests. Sheikh Ahmed Dalmouk Al Maktoum from Dubai's royal family is quietly involved in controversial carbon offsetting deals in Africa. Some of these agreements cover up to 20% of the countries involved. This development gives rise to two primary concerns. First, there is growing unease about land and resource ownership, with fears that African communities may be sidelined in decision-making processes, potentially leading to the loss of control over their ancestral lands. Secondly, questions emerge regarding the effectiveness of carbon offsetting itself, with apprehensions that companies might leverage these deals, creating an illusion of environmental responsibility without genuinely reducing their emissions. The United States also remains a significant foreign player on the continent, but is losing ground to China in Africa. While China's economic involvement has yielded tangible benefits for some nations, its disregard for human rights and the escalating military presence raise concerns about neocolonialism and the potential for future conflicts. Since 2000, the EU and China have hosted recurring summits with African leaders every 3 years. China's aid and investment, supported by loans from Chinese banks, have driven infrastructure projects such as railways and ports, strengthening diplomatic ties. While this has positioned China as the fastest growing foreign power in Africa, concerns are rising about the implications of its increasing influence. China's increasing influence is gradually empowering the projection of military strength, evident in the opening of its first naval base on the continent in Djibouti in 2016. Observing China's success, other nations swiftly followed suit. Turkey and India convened their inaugural summits in 2008, subsequently expanding their diplomatic presence to 44 and 47 embassies respectively. This rush has presented opportunities for African countries in trade and investment. However, economic and diplomatic competition has devolved into proxy wars, particularly since the expanded presence of Russia and the United Arab Emirates. Most detrimental is the military support provided by these nations to the Rapid Support Forces, a rebellious paramilitary group in Sudan engaged in conflict with the National Army and perpetuating genocide in Darfur, as demonstrated by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's extensive tours across the continent, including a recent visit to North Africa in December 2023. While Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia maintain close ties with the United States, the region has been shaken by protests related to Israel's conflict with Hamas since October. In Tunis, demonstrators have gathered in front of the United States and French embassies, advocating for a free Palestine. As Western powers see declining popularity, Moscow has increased its endeavors to strengthen ties with North Africa. It is actively shaping its narrative on issues like Ukraine and Gaza. Russian officials engage in reciprocal visits with North African leaders, aiming to establish new trade agreements and signing joint memorandums covering a range of topics from Ukraine to Syria. Lavrov has also visited southern African countries abundant in natural resources such as oil, uranium, copper, gold, and cobalt. This underscores Russia's primary focus in Africa, resource extraction. While the extraction of natural resources is a top priority, Russia is also investing in security and military projects on the continent. As the world's second-largest arms exporter after the US, Russia annually sells billions of dollars worth of weapons across Africa. Algeria, boasting one of Africa's largest militaries, signed a substantial arms contract with Russia, amounting to between $12 and $17 billion in 2022. The quest for dominance in Africa by powerful nations is evident. Yet, this is only the beginning. In 2024, foreign interference is set to intensify, exacerbating conflicts in a region already contending with coups and civil wars. However, African leaders have the opportunity to counter these influences and protect vital interests. The diminishing French influence in the Sahel serves as a clear example. The once dominant French military presence in countries like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso has significantly reduced, spurred by public protests demanding the removal of French forces and diplomats. So, can Africa still turn things around, reclaim its rights, and stand firmly on the global stage? Join us on a journey to discover hidden stories about Africa, subscribe to explore its history, understand geopolitics, and navigate its diverse economy. Beyond information, it's a mission to challenge misconceptions and celebrate Africa's diversity. Subscribe, embrace the unknown, and join our community reshaping perspectives.